There is a moment that almost everyone experiences, although most of us pass through it without noticing. An idea appears. Perhaps it is a business you want to build, a book you want to write, a different body, a different career, a different relationship with yourself. Maybe it is simply the quiet thought that keeps returning. There has to be more than this. At first, the idea is almost weightless. It exists only in imagination. Nothing around you has changed. Your circumstances remain exactly as they were yesterday. Yet something has changed. Your attention has found a direction. And once attention repeatedly moves in one direction, your life begins to organize itself differently. This is where the real mystery begins. We often speak about dreams as though they are wishes waiting for the universe to fulfill them. We visualize a future, repeat affirmations, feel hopeful for a while, and then return to the same habits that created our present circumstances. But intention is not wishing. Intention is organized attention followed by organized action. There is also a popular temptation to explain this transformation using quantum physics. Terms such as wave function, observation, frequency, and quantum collapse are often used to suggest that consciousness can directly select a desired physical reality. That is a fascinating metaphor, but it should not be confused with established physics. Quantum measurement describes physical systems at microscopic scales. It does not provide scientific evidence that thinking about a desired future literally collapses the universe into that outcome. The deeper idea is more practical and perhaps more powerful. Your mind constantly selects what to notice. Your brain changes through repetition. Your expectations influence your behavior. Your behavior changes your environment. Your environment feeds information back into your brain. And through this continuous loop, an imagined possibility can gradually become a lived reality. The bridge between dream and reality is therefore not magic. It is transformation. A thought becomes attention. Attention becomes perception. Perception influences decision. Decision becomes action. Action becomes repetition. Repetition becomes habit. And habit, given enough time, becomes a life. This book explores that bridge. We will use the language of quantum possibility as a philosophical framework, while keeping the distinction between metaphor and established science clear. The real question is not whether your thoughts magically control particles. The real question is far more intimate. What happens when you become extraordinarily deliberate about what you repeatedly give your mind, your energy, and your actions to? Because somewhere between imagination and behavior lies a hidden threshold. Before you cross it, your dream is merely an idea. After you cross it, the dream begins demanding a different version of you. And that is where our journey begins. Chapter 1. The Observer and the Direction of Your Life. Every morning, before you consciously decide what kind of day you are going to have, your mind has already begun making choices for you. It notices certain things. It ignores others. It searches for familiar patterns. It anticipates what is likely to happen. And then, almost invisibly, it guides your attention toward whatever appears important. Consider two people walking down the same city street. One has recently decided to buy a particular model of car. Suddenly, that car seems to be everywhere. Another person has become interested in opening a small restaurant. Within weeks, they begin noticing restaurants they had walked past for years. They notice menus, locations, customer behavior, pricing, interior design, even the way people enter and leave. The city did not suddenly change. Their attention did. This simple experience contains an important clue about intention. We do not experience reality as a completely neutral stream of information. The brain receives far more information than conscious awareness can process. Attention therefore acts as a filter. What you repeatedly consider important becomes easier to notice. What you repeatedly ignore becomes easier to miss. And what you repeatedly expect can influence how you interpret what you encounter. This does not mean that thought creates physical reality by itself. It means something subtler. Thought helps determine which parts of reality become psychologically available to you. That distinction matters. If you believe that opportunities are everywhere, you may begin investigating possibilities that you previously overlooked. If you believe that every failure proves you are incapable, the same setback may become evidence against yourself. The external event can be identical. The internal interpretation can be completely different. And that interpretation influences what happens next. The hidden power of attention. Imagine standing inside a vast library. There are thousands of books around you. You cannot read them all. So you choose one shelf, then one section, then one book, then one page. Your attention works in a similar way. Life presents an enormous field of information, but conscious awareness can examine only a small portion of it at any given moment. This creates an unusual paradox. You may live inside a world filled with possibilities while experiencing only the possibilities your attention repeatedly selects. This is why intention begins with observation. Before you can change the direction of your life, you must discover where your attention is already going. Ask yourself, what do I think about when nobody is asking me to think about anything? What problems occupy my mind repeatedly? What do I automatically notice when I enter a room? What do I fear will happen? What do I expect will happen? What do I constantly compare myself with? What future do I repeatedly imagine? These questions reveal something more important than your stated goals. They reveal your practice direction. You may say that you want peace while spending most of your mental energy rehearsing conflict. You may say that you want freedom while constantly thinking about what other people expect from you. You may say that you want to create something meaningful while repeatedly consuming the work of everyone else. Your conscious goal may point in one direction while your practiced attention points somewhere completely different. And when that happens, the practice direction usually wins. The difference between wanting and intending. This is where most dreams quietly disappear. Person says, I want to become a writer, but wanting is not yet intention. They may think about writing. They may purchase notebooks. They may watch videos about writing. They may imagine holding their finished book. Yet, if they never sit down and write, the dream remains entirely inside imagination. Intention begins when the imagined future starts influencing present behavior. The writer opens the document. The entrepreneur makes the first uncomfortable phone call. The musician practices when nobody is listening. The person who wants better health changes what they repeatedly do when nobody is watching. The dream has begun crossing the boundary between thought and matter. Not because the universe was forced to obey a thought. Because the person carrying the thought began behaving differently. This is the first transformation. A possibility becomes powerful when it begins organizing behavior. The brain learns what you repeat. Neuroplasticity gives us an important piece of this puzzle. The brain is not a fixed machine that remains identical throughout life. Repeated patterns of thought and behavior can influence the strength and organization of neural connections. Practice matters. Repetition matters. Attention matters. This is why an unfamiliar activity can initially require enormous concentration and later become almost automatic. The first time you perform a complex task, every step may demand conscious effort. After hundreds of repetitions, much of it becomes easier. The brain has learned the pattern. The same principle can operate psychologically. If you repeatedly rehearse fear, fear can become familiar. If you repeatedly rehearse self-doubt, self-doubt can become an automatic response. If you repeatedly practice noticing opportunities, your mind becomes increasingly prepared to recognize them. If you repeatedly act despite discomfort, discomfort gradually becomes less capable of controlling your behavior. This is where focused intention becomes practical. You are not trying to command reality through thought. You are training yourself to become capable of recognizing and acting upon a different set of possibilities. The future must become specific. There is another problem with vague intention. The mind cannot easily organize itself around something undefined. I want a better life sounds inspiring, but what does it actually mean? Better financially? Better emotionally? Better physically? More creative? More peaceful? More independent? Without clarity, attention has no stable direction. A useful intention therefore needs shape. Instead of, I want to be successful, try, I want to build a sustainable business that gives me greater control over my time. Instead of, I want to become healthier, try, I want to become someone who consistently trains, sleeps well, and eats in a way that supports my energy. The difference is enormous. The first statement describes a destination. The second begins describing an identity and a behavior. And behavior is where transformation becomes measurable. The first experiment. Try something simple. Choose one meaningful objective. Not 10. 1. Write it down in a single sentence. Then ask, if this were already becoming part of my life, what would I be doing differently this week? Not someday. This week. Perhaps you would make one phone call. Study for 30 minutes each morning. Walk every evening. Write 500 words. Apply for a position. Have an honest conversation. Cancel something that repeatedly consumes your attention. The action may appear almost insignificant. That is precisely why people underestimate it. Reality rarely changes because of one dramatic thought. It changes because a new direction is repeated long enough to become structurally different from the old one. A compass does not need to move the traveler thousands of miles at once. It only needs to point consistently in another direction. The observer becomes a participant. There is a seductive idea that we are merely observers of our lives. We watch circumstances happen. We wait for opportunities. We hope that the right person appears. We wait for motivation. We wait for confidence. We wait for the perfect moment. But intention changes the relationship. You stop asking only, what is happening to me? And begin asking, what am I repeatedly contributing to what happens next? That question is uncomfortable. It is also liberating. Because if your entire life were controlled by forces outside you, there would be very little room for transformation. But if your attention, interpretation, decisions, and habits participate in shaping your trajectory, then even small changes matter. You do not need to control the entire future. You need to influence the next direction, and then the next, and then the next. Eventually, those small directional choices begin describing a path. The first collapse is not quantum. There is a useful way to borrow the language of quantum theory without pretending that psychology and physics are the same thing. Imagine possibility as a field of many potential futures. At any moment, countless things could happen. You cannot live all of them. You choose, not through magical observation, but through attention, decision, and action. Every meaningful decision removes some possibilities from your immediate path while making others more likely. You apply for one job instead of another. You move to one city instead of another. You spend an evening studying instead of scrolling. You call someone instead of avoiding the conversation. Each decision changes what can happen next. In that sense, life contains countless moments of narrowing possibility. And most of them happen so quietly that you barely notice. Until one day you look backward and realize, the life you are living was assembled from hundreds of decisions that once seemed insignificant. That is why intention matters. Not because your mind is a supernatural force that bends the universe to your wishes, but because the direction of your attention influences the direction of your behavior, and the direction of your behavior influences the direction of your life. Chapter 2. Training the mind to recognize the future. There is a strange experience that happens when you decide to change your life. At first, everything looks exactly the same. The same room, the same responsibilities, the same people, the same morning routine. Nothing outside you appears to have received the message. Yet internally, something has begun moving. You have made a decision. And although a decision can take only a few seconds, its consequences can unfold for years. The difficulty is that the mind does not immediately trust the future you have chosen. It trusts what it already knows. That is why changing your life can feel uncomfortable even when the change is exactly what you wanted. You may have spent years living one way. Your brain has learned that way. Your emotional responses have learned it. Your habits have learned it. Even your identity may have been built around it. Then one morning you decide, I am going to become different. Your conscious mind may be enthusiastic. The rest of your system may quietly ask, are you sure? This is where intention encounters resistance. Not because reality is fighting you. because familiarity has momentum, the comfort of the known. Imagine walking through the same neighborhood for 10 years. You know where the road bends. You know which store appears after the intersection. You know where traffic slows and which shortcut saves 5 minutes. Now imagine taking a completely different route. The new route may be faster. It may even be more beautiful. But at first, you will probably feel less comfortable. You will hesitate. You will check directions. The old route required almost no conscious attention. The new one does. Changing your life can feel the same way. The old pattern is efficient because it has been practiced. The new pattern is demanding because it has not. That distinction matters. Difficulty does not necessarily mean that you are moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes it simply means that your brain has not learned the new direction yet. Why repetition changes you. Every repeated behavior sends information to the brain. Do something once and it may remain an isolated event. Repeat it and the brain begins treating it as a pattern. Practice a language and words become easier to retrieve. Practice an instrument and movements become increasingly automatic. Practice responding to criticism with defensiveness and defensiveness becomes familiar. Practice pausing before reacting and eventually the pause becomes easier to access. This is one of the practical powers of neuroplasticity. The brain changes in response to experience. That does not mean that simply imagining something guarantees that it will happen. But repeated mental rehearsal can influence how you perceive, anticipate, and respond. This gives intention a biological dimension. Your future begins influencing your present when you repeatedly practice thinking and behaving in ways consistent with that future. The future you must become familiar. There is a common mistake people make when visualizing goals. They imagine the final scene. The money, the house, the successful business, the finished book, the healthy body, the applause, the freedom. Then they return to ordinary life. The problem is that the final image can be exciting without changing the patterns required to reach it. A more useful question is, what does the person who lives that future repeatedly do? If you want to become a writer, imagine yourself writing when the excitement has disappeared. If you want financial independence, imagine yourself making ordinary decisions that protect your long-term resources. If you want to become physically stronger, imagine yourself training when motivation is absent. If you want to become calmer, imagine encountering the same irritation that once controlled you and responding differently. Now visualization becomes preparation. You are not merely looking at the destination. You are rehearsing the identity capable of reaching it. The gap between image and evidence. There is another reason people abandon their intentions. They expect immediate evidence. They decide to change their lives on Monday. By Wednesday, nothing dramatic has happened. By Friday, the old emotions have returned. So they conclude, this isn't working. But transformation rarely announces itself immediately. A seed does not become a tree because you watched it for 3 days. Invisible processes come first. The roots develop before the branches become visible. Human change often follows a similar sequence. First, the idea changes. Then attention changes. Then choices begin changing. Then habits change. Then behavior becomes more consistent. Eventually, circumstances begin reflecting those accumulated changes. The mistake is judging the process only by the final visible result. You may already be changing while your external life still looks almost identical. ## emotional rehearsal. Thought alone is often too weak to reorganize behavior. Emotion gives thought significance. Consider 2 statements. I should exercise. I want to become someone who feels strong and capable in my own body. The first sounds like an instruction. The second contains identity and emotional meaning. This is why emotionally meaningful goals tend to hold attention longer. The brain is constantly evaluating what matters. If an idea carries little emotional importance, attention eventually wanders. But when something matters deeply, the mind returns to it. This does not mean emotional intensity magically attracts circumstances. It means emotion can increase the importance assigned to an idea, making sustained attention and action more likely. That is a grounded form of what people sometimes call raising your frequency. Your internal state changes. Your priorities change. Your behavior changes. And therefore your trajectory changes. Do not confuse intensity with obsession. There is a danger here. Focused intention is not obsessive thinking. A person can become so attached to an outcome that every day becomes a measurement of whether it has arrived. They check. They compare. They worry. They repeatedly ask, when will it happen? Paradoxically, this can weaken the process they are trying to strengthen. Healthy intention has direction without constant desperation. You know where you are going. You take the next step. Then you return to the present. The goal provides orientation. It does not need to occupy every second of consciousness. The identity behind the goal. Perhaps the deeper question is not, what do I want? It is, who would I have to become for this to feel natural? This question changes everything. Suppose someone wants to build a successful company. They may initially focus on revenue, but the deeper transformation may involve becoming more disciplined, patient, comfortable with uncertainty, better at communicating, and more capable of making decisions without constant reassurance. The external goal is measurable. The internal transformation is foundational. A person does not simply achieve a new life. They develop the capacity to live it. Sometimes the greatest transformation occurs before the desired result appears. You become the person who can hold the future before you visibly possess it. Your environment is teaching you. Your surroundings also participate in this process. Every environment contains cues. Your phone may cue distraction. A particular room may cue work. Certain people may cue an old version of yourself. A particular time of day may trigger a familiar habit. This means intention can be strengthened by changing the environment around it. If you want to read more, make books easier to reach. If you want to write, make the writing space immediately available. If you want to exercise in the morning, prepare beforehand. If you want fewer distractions, increase the distance between yourself and distracting devices. This sounds ordinary. It is, and that is precisely the point. Transformation does not always require extraordinary experiences. Sometimes it requires designing ordinary life so the desired behavior becomes easier to repeat. When the old self returns, eventually the old pattern will return. You will become tired. You will become frustrated. Something will go wrong. A familiar temptation will appear. Someone may remind you of the person you used to be. For a moment you may think, maybe I haven't changed at all. But an old reaction appearing does not mean the old identity has won. The important question is what happens next. Do you automatically follow it? Or can you observe it? That tiny space between impulse and action is important. It is where conscious intention begins becoming stronger than automatic habit. At first, the space may last only a second. Eventually, it can become larger. And within that space, choice becomes possible. The future is built in small decisions. People often imagine transformation as one enormous breakthrough. Sometimes there are breakthroughs, but most lives are changed through accumulation. One conversation, one decision, one morning, one page, one refusal, one new habit repeated again and again. The future rarely arrives as a finished object. It emerges through thousands of present moments. This is why intention must eventually become practical. If your vision never changes your calendar, habits, relationships, spending, work, or daily behavior, it remains imagination. A dream becomes different when it begins changing what you do. That is where possibility acquires momentum. Chapter 3. When possibility becomes direction. There is a moment in every meaningful change when a dream stops being something you merely admire and begins becoming something you are willing to organize your life around. Before that moment, the future remains one possibility among many. You think about it. You imagine it. You may even talk about it. But your daily behavior continues serving the old life. Then something changes. You begin making decisions as though the future matters now. That is when intention becomes powerful. Not because thought magically controls the universe, but because focused thought can change what you notice, what you practice, what you choose, and ultimately what you become. The mind does not create reality simply by wishing. It participates in creating your experience of reality through attention and action. This distinction matters. The popular language of quantum manifestation often suggests that consciousness directly collapses physical possibilities into whatever we desire. Quantum mechanics does not provide evidence for that claim about human intentions. But there is a deeper and more practical truth hiding underneath the metaphor. Your attention determines which possibilities you repeatedly examine. What you repeatedly examine influences what you recognize. What you recognize influences what you choose. And repeated choices can change the course of a life. That is a form of transformation worth understanding. The attention filter. Think about walking through a crowded city. Hundreds of sounds surround you. Cars pass. People talk. Signs appear. Music plays. Yet you cannot consciously process everything. Your brain constantly filters information. Now imagine that you have recently decided to buy a particular type of car. Suddenly you begin noticing that car everywhere. It seems as though the number of those cars has suddenly increased. It has not. Your attention has changed. The world did not suddenly become different. Your relationship with the information in it changed. This happens with opportunities as well. A person who begins seriously considering entrepreneurship may suddenly notice business problems that could become opportunities. Someone interested in writing may begin noticing stories everywhere. Someone preparing for a career change may suddenly recognize conversations that could lead to new possibilities. The opportunities may have existed before. They simply were not important enough to receive sustained attention. This is one reason focused intention matters. It changes the questions your mind repeatedly asks. And the questions you repeatedly ask shape what you notice. The question beneath the goal. Suppose someone says, "I want to become successful." That sounds ambitious, but it is vague. Successful at what? For what reason? According to whose definition? And what would success actually change? A more useful intention might be, "I want to build work that gives me financial stability while allowing me to use my strongest abilities." Now the mind has something more precise to work with. It can begin looking for relevant information. It can evaluate opportunities according to a clearer standard. It can reject distractions that do not serve the direction. Clarity gives attention somewhere to go. Without clarity, attention becomes scattered. And scattered attention produces scattered effort. The problem with constant possibility. Modern life gives us an extraordinary number of choices. There are thousands of careers, thousands of opinions, thousands of sources of information, thousands of ways to spend an afternoon, thousands of things we could become. This sounds like freedom. Sometimes it becomes paralysis. When everything remains possible, nothing receives enough attention to become real through sustained effort. A person can spend years imagining different lives without committing to one long enough to develop it. They become addicted to possibility. They love imagining who they could become, but they resist choosing who they will actually become. Intention requires narrowing, not because other possibilities disappear forever, but because meaningful creation requires concentration. A beam of light becomes more powerful when it is focused. Human attention works in a similar practical way. The more deliberately you direct it, the more deeply you can work with whatever you have chosen. From thought to practice. A goal becomes believable to the nervous system when experience begins supporting it. Imagine someone who wants to become a confident public speaker. At first, confidence may exist only as an idea. Then they speak for 5 minutes. They survive the discomfort. They speak again. They become slightly better. They receive useful feedback. They improve. Eventually, the brain has evidence. I can do this. That statement is different from positive thinking. It is built from experience. This is why action is so important. Thought can point toward a future. Action gives the brain evidence that the future is becoming possible. The process is gradual. You do not need to feel completely confident before beginning. Often confidence is created by beginning. The emotional future. There is another layer. People rarely pursue goals because of the goal itself. They pursue what they believe the goal will make them feel. Money may represent security. Recognition may represent significance. Fitness may represent confidence. Freedom may represent relief. Love may represent belonging. Achievement may represent proof that they matter. This is where intention can become confused. You may believe you want a particular future when what you actually want is an emotional experience associated with that future. If you do not understand the difference, you may spend years chasing an external object while neglecting the internal condition you were really seeking. Someone may spend decades pursuing wealth because they believe wealth will finally make them safe. But if their mind has learned constant fear, greater wealth may simply provide a more expensive environment in which to remain afraid. The external achievement cannot automatically resolve the internal pattern. This is why transformation must happen on more than one level. You need a destination, but you also need to understand what you believe the destination will give you. When you understand that, intention becomes more honest. The danger of emotional attachment. There is also a paradox. The more desperately you demand a particular outcome, the more difficult it can become to think clearly. You begin interpreting every event as evidence. A small setback becomes proof of failure. A small success becomes proof that everything is finally guaranteed. Your emotional state begins controlling your judgment. Focused intention is different. It is committed without becoming desperate. You can deeply desire something while remaining capable of adapting. This matters because reality contains variables you cannot control. You can influence your preparation. You can influence your decisions. You can influence your persistence. You cannot command every external event. Maturity is learning the difference. Intention gives direction. Awareness keeps that direction flexible enough to respond to reality. The moment possibility narrows. Every meaningful decision removes some possibilities. When you choose a profession, you spend less time pursuing others. When you commit to a relationship, other romantic possibilities become irrelevant. When you decide to write a book, countless other uses of your time disappear. This is not necessarily loss. It is concentration. A life becomes tangible partly because possibilities are converted into commitments. The future begins narrowing from an endless field of possibilities into a specific path. And that narrowing is where effort becomes meaningful. You cannot build everything. You can build something. You cannot pursue every direction. You can choose one direction and go deeply into it. This is not the collapse of a quantum wave function. It is something more understandable and more useful. It is the collapse of indecision. Your life begins moving when you stop asking what could happen and begin asking what you are willing to practice. The discipline of returning. You will lose focus. Everyone does. Your attention will wander. Old habits will return. Unexpected problems will appear. The important skill is not maintaining perfect concentration forever. It is learning to return. Return to the intention. Return to the next action. Return to the question that matters. Return without turning the mistake into a judgment about yourself. A distracted mind can still become a disciplined mind. The difference is repetition. Every return strengthens the ability to return again. Eventually, the future you once had to consciously remember begins influencing your ordinary decisions automatically. That is when intention starts becoming identity. And identity is more powerful than motivation because motivation asks, "Do I feel like doing this today?" Identity asks, "What does someone like me do now?" That question can change everything. The real bridge, the distance between a dream and reality, is rarely crossed in one dramatic moment. It is crossed through thousands of small agreements between thought and behavior. You think differently. You notice differently. You choose differently. You practice differently. You respond differently. Then, gradually, your life begins producing different results. The dream has not been magically pulled from another dimension. It has been translated. Thought became attention. Attention became choice. Choice became behavior. Behavior became habit. Habit became character. Character began shaping circumstances. Chapter 4. anchoring intention in the real world. A dream can change the way you see tomorrow, but only action can change what tomorrow actually contains. This is where many beautiful ideas about intention quietly fail. A person imagines a different life. They become excited. They visualize the future. They feel certain for a few days. Then Monday arrives. The alarm rings. The old routine begins. The old distractions return. And slowly, the imagined future becomes something they remember rather than something they are building. The problem is not that the dream was too small. The problem is that it never became anchored. Intention needs a physical expression. It needs something you can do, repeat, measure, and improve. That is where an imagined possibility begins becoming part of ordinary life. The first physical proof. Suppose you want to write a book. Thinking about the book changes nothing outside your mind. Opening a document and writing one page changes something. It may be tiny, but it is physical evidence. The future you imagined has produced an action in the present. The same principle applies everywhere. A person who wants to become healthier prepares a better meal. A person who wants financial freedom reviews their spending. A person who wants a new career learns a skill. A person who wants deeper relationships begins an honest conversation. These actions may look ordinary, but meaningful transformation is usually built from ordinary actions performed with unusual consistency. The mistake is waiting for the action to feel significant. It does not need to feel significant. It needs to be repeated. When intention enters repetition, it gains structure. When repetition gains structure, it begins influencing identity. And identity eventually influences behavior without requiring constant effort. The environment remembers. Your environment can either support your intention or quietly undermine it. Imagine someone deciding to read every evening while keeping their phone beside them, notifications active, entertainment one click away, and no book within reach. Their intention is competing against an environment designed for distraction. Another person places the book beside the chair, keeps the phone in another room, and creates a specific period for reading. Neither person possesses magical discipline. Their environments simply create different probabilities of behavior. This is an important principle. Do not ask only, how strong is my willpower? Ask, what does my environment make easy? Your surroundings are constantly giving your brain instructions. A desk can signal work. A bed can signal rest. A notification can signal interruption. A particular group of friends can reinforce an old identity. A carefully designed environment can become an ally in transformation. The physical world as feedback. Once you begin acting differently, the environment begins responding. You write consistently and eventually have pages. You exercise consistently and eventually become stronger. You save consistently and eventually have reserves. You study consistently and eventually know more. These results provide feedback. Feedback strengthens belief. Belief can strengthen persistence. Persistence produces more results. A cycle begins. This is much more grounded than the idea that thoughts simply attract outcomes. You are creating a feedback loop between intention and experience. Thought influences action. Action produces evidence. Evidence influences belief. Belief influences further action. Over time, the loop can become powerful. But the reverse loop is possible too. Fear produces avoidance. Avoidance produces missed opportunities. Missed opportunities reinforce fear. Fear produces more avoidance. The mind can therefore build either a constructive loop or a destructive one. The direction depends partly on what you repeatedly reinforce. Breaking the old loop. Sometimes creating a new habit is not enough. You must interrupt an old one. Imagine someone who automatically reaches for their phone whenever they feel uncomfortable. The discomfort appears. The phone appears. A few minutes disappear. Then the person feels guilty. The guilt creates more discomfort. The phone becomes attractive again. The cycle continues. The solution is not simply to declare, I will never use my phone again. That may work briefly. A better strategy is to identify the moment before the habitual behavior. What emotion appeared? What thought appeared? What situation triggered it? What did the person expect the behavior to provide? Perhaps the phone was not really the problem. Perhaps the person was seeking relief from boredom, uncertainty, loneliness, or anxiety. Once the underlying trigger becomes visible, a different response becomes possible. This is how awareness begins changing automatic behavior. The space before action. There is a small interval between an impulse and an action. Most of the time, we barely notice it. Someone criticizes you. Anger rises. You respond. Someone disappoints you. You withdraw. You feel anxious. You reach for distraction. The sequence appears automatic. But with practice, the interval can become visible. The emotion arises. You notice it. You pause. Then you choose. That pause is one of the most important places where intention becomes real. You cannot always control what appears in your mind. You can become better at deciding what happens next. This is not suppression. It is participation. You are no longer simply being carried by every impulse. You are learning to respond consciously. The delay between change and results. One of the hardest parts of transformation is the delay. You change your behavior today. The visible result may not appear for weeks or months. This creates doubt. You begin wondering whether the effort matters. Consider physical training. A single workout rarely transforms the body, but repeated training changes it. Financial discipline works similarly. One saved dollar does not create financial freedom, but repeated intelligent decisions can eventually create security. Learning works the same way. 1 hour of study may not change your career. Hundreds of hours may. The mind often wants immediate evidence. Life frequently works through accumulation. This is why patience is not passive. Patience is the ability to continue meaningful action while results are still forming. Protecting the new pattern. Whenever you begin changing, the old pattern will attempt to return. Not because it has intention, because it has history. The old behavior has been repeated thousands of times. The new behavior may have been practiced only 20 times. You should expect the old pattern to feel stronger initially. That does not mean it is better. It means it is familiar. The goal is not to destroy the old pattern through force. It is to give the new pattern enough repetition that it becomes increasingly natural. Every time you choose the new response, you add another piece of evidence. Eventually, what once required discipline becomes ordinary. And once something becomes ordinary, it no longer feels like transformation. It simply feels like you. Do not build your future on constant motivation. Motivation is useful. It is not reliable enough to carry an entire life. There will be mornings when you feel inspired. There will also be mornings when you feel nothing. If your intention depends on inspiration, your progress will fluctuate with your emotions. A stronger system depends on commitments. You decide beforehand what matters. Then you act even when the emotional excitement has disappeared. This does not mean forcing yourself endlessly. It means distinguishing between temporary resistance and genuine misalignment. Sometimes the right action is persistence. Sometimes it is adjustment. Wisdom lies in learning the difference. The future becomes physical. At some point, something subtle happens. The future you once imagined begins appearing in ordinary details. The skills are there. The habits are there. The relationships have changed. Your decisions have changed. Your surroundings have changed. You may even forget how unfamiliar the new life once felt. Then you look backward and realize that the transformation did not happen on one special day. It happened through hundreds of small moments when you chose one direction instead of another. That is what it means to anchor intention. You take something invisible and give it repeated physical expression. You turn thought into behavior, behavior into structure, structure into habit, habit into identity, and identity into a life that increasingly reflects the direction you chose. But there is still one final challenge. What happens when the results take longer than expected? What happens when reality refuses to match your timeline? What happens when you work faithfully toward something and the outcome remains uncertain? That is where disciplined intention becomes something deeper than positive thinking. It becomes the ability to remain committed without demanding certainty. And that is the final dimension of the journey. Final chapter. When intention becomes a way of living. There comes a point when you stop asking whether your intention is working. You simply continue living in alignment with it. In the beginning, intention requires effort. You remind yourself what matters. You create routines. You correct your attention. You return after distraction. Later, the direction becomes familiar. You no longer need to constantly persuade yourself to take the next step. The person you were trying to become begins influencing the person you are. This is where disciplined intention reaches its deepest form. It is no longer something you practice occasionally. It becomes a way of living. The problem with needing certainty. One of the greatest obstacles to meaningful change is the demand for certainty. We want proof before commitment. We want to know that the business will succeed before building it. We want to know that the relationship will last before opening ourselves. We want to know that the effort will pay off before beginning. But life rarely provides that kind of guarantee. If certainty were required before action, very little would ever be created. Every meaningful possibility contains some uncertainty. The better question is not whether you can guarantee the outcome. The better question is whether this direction is worthy of your effort. You do not need to know exactly how the future will unfold. You need enough clarity to take the next meaningful step. The difference between faith and fantasy. There is an important difference between believing in a possibility and pretending that reality has no resistance. Fantasy says that if you think positively enough, everything will happen exactly as you want. Disciplined intention says that you do not know exactly what will happen, but you know what you are willing to build, practice, and pursue. This approach is stronger because it does not require reality to obey your imagination. It allows reality to teach you. Perhaps the original plan needs to change. Perhaps the timeline is longer. Perhaps the goal itself needs refinement. Perhaps an unexpected opportunity appears that leads somewhere better. Intention should give you direction without making you blind. A rigid mind demands that reality follow the plan. A focused mind follows its purpose while remaining responsive to reality. When the dream changes, sometimes the future you once wanted no longer feels right. This can be confusing. You may wonder whether you have failed. Perhaps you spent years pursuing something and eventually discovered that you were pursuing someone else's definition of success. That realization is not necessarily failure. It may be awareness. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to discover that the destination you once imagined was only a symbol of something deeper. Maybe you thought you wanted wealth, but what you really wanted was freedom. Maybe you thought you wanted recognition, but what you really wanted was significance. Maybe you thought you wanted success, but what you really wanted was peace. As awareness grows, intention becomes more refined. The goal becomes less about acquiring an object and more about creating a life consistent with what truly matters. The most important transformation, perhaps the greatest change, does not happen when you finally obtain what you wanted. It happens when you become capable of pursuing something without allowing the pursuit to consume you. You can work hard without worshiping achievement. You can want wealth without making wealth your identity. You can desire recognition without requiring applause to feel valuable. You can pursue a dream while remaining present in the life you already have. This is a different kind of freedom. You are moving toward the future without abandoning the present. You are ambitious without being possessed by ambition. You are focused without becoming narrow. You are committed without becoming desperate. That balance is difficult, but it is possible. The observer and the participant become one. At the beginning of this journey, you learn to notice where your attention goes. Then you learn to direct it. Then you began turning intention into action. Now the distinction between observing and participating becomes smaller. You notice your thoughts and choose which deserve attention. You notice your emotions and choose how to respond. You notice opportunities and decide which deserve pursuit. You notice old patterns and decide whether to repeat them. This is conscious participation in your own life. It is not control over everything. It is participation. power is not the ability to command reality. It is the ability to participate deliberately in what you can influence. The quantum metaphor properly understood. The language of quantum possibility can be beautiful when used carefully. The universe contains possibilities far beyond what any individual can predict. Your life also contains possibilities you cannot currently see. But you do not need to believe that your thoughts literally collapse quantum wave functions in order to appreciate the deeper lesson. Your attention selects. Your brain learns. Your choices accumulate. Your actions create consequences. Your habits shape identity. Your identity influences future choices. This is enough. You do not need to turn psychology into physics to make transformation extraordinary. Human learning is already extraordinary. A thought can become a repeated action. A repeated action can become a habit. A habit can reshape a life. The real mystery is not whether your mind can magically control the universe. The real mystery is how much of your own life you have been living automatically. Your intention needs a life. Now return to the question that began this journey. What do you want? Not what sounds impressive. Not what will make someone else proud. Not what society tells you should matter. What genuinely matters to you. Then ask what this intention would look like in ordinary life. Not someday. Today. What would you read? What would you stop doing? Who would you call? What would you practice? What would you protect? What would you refuse? What would you begin? The answer is where your intention becomes real. A dream does not need perfect conditions. It needs a beginning, and then another beginning, and another. The discipline of returning. You will still lose focus. You will still become distracted. You will still doubt yourself. You will still have days when the future seems impossibly far away. Do not interpret these moments as proof that you have failed. Return. Return to the direction. Return to the practice. Return to the next useful action. Transformation does not require perfect consistency. It requires enough consistency to keep moving. The ability to return may be more important than the ability to never become distracted. Distraction is human. Returning is a skill. Every return strengthens that skill. The future is already being built. Perhaps you have been waiting for the moment when your future finally begins. But look carefully. It has already begun. Every decision you made today contributed something. Every habit you repeated reinforced something. Every thought you practiced made something more familiar. Every action moved possibility in one direction or another. The future is not waiting somewhere ahead of you. It is being assembled through the present. That does not mean everything is predetermined. It means your present participation matters. You are constantly placing pieces into a structure whose final shape you cannot yet see. So choose those pieces carefully. A final practice. Tonight sit quietly for a few minutes. Forget the pressure to manifest anything. Forget the need to force an outcome. Ask yourself what future you genuinely want to move toward. Ask what kind of person would naturally live that future. Then ask what one thing that person would do tomorrow. Then do it. Not because you have guaranteed the outcome. Not because the universe owes you a reward. But because you have chosen a direction. That is enough for today. Tomorrow choose again. Eventually you may discover that the distance between the person you imagined becoming and the person you are has become surprisingly small. Not because reality suddenly changed around you. Because you changed the way you participated in it. Epilogue. A thought begins quietly. Sometimes it arrives as an image. Sometimes as a question. Sometimes as a feeling that says there must be another way. At first it seems insignificant. But if you give it attention, it becomes clearer. If you give it practice, it becomes stronger. If you give it action, it becomes physical. If you give it patience, it becomes part of you. That is the journey from possibility to reality. Not a supernatural command. Not a guarantee. Not a shortcut around uncertainty. It is a disciplined relationship between what you imagine, what you attend to, and what you repeatedly do. Your future does not need you to predict it perfectly. It needs you to participate in creating it. Choose your direction carefully. Give your attention to what matters. Turn intention into action. Let experience guide you. Keep moving toward the life you want. The real beginning is not when the dream arrives. It is when you choose to live in its direction.